They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us.
Francisco Sanchez, a 45-year-old man from Mexico who's in the U.S. illegally, is accused of killing Catherine Steinle while she was out for a walk last Wednesday.
They're bringing drugs.
San Francisco is one of dozens of cities that calls itself a sanctuary, meaning it doesn't fully cooperate with federal immigration authorities.
They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
So there's no guarantee that this person would have been held in custody even if there wasn't a sanctuary policy.
Immigration reform. Maybe you thought you've heard all the arguments pro and con, but the Senate is about to fan the flames again when it takes up a bill aimed at eliminating so-called sanctuary cities. That bill sailed through the House in July following the death of a young San Francisco woman named Kathleen Steinle. Kathleen's grieving parents claimed their daughter would still be alive today if the city had complied with a request by federal immigration authorities to keep the alleged shooter, Francisco Lopez Sanchez, in custody. Lopez Sanchez had already been deported 5 times to his native Mexico, and he was just completing a 4-year prison term. But San Francisco says such detention orders violate the due process rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and which even those not legally in this country are entitled to. Some 300 jurisdictions around the country have adopted similar policies. The House bill would cut sanctuary cities off from some federal law enforcement funding. But critics say this is like using a club to swat a fly. Statistics show that undocumented immigrants commit fewer crimes than U.S. citizens. Nevertheless, the bill has become a platform for blasting federal immigration policies. Few American cities owe more to immigration, both legal and illegal, than New York. But New York, as a sanctuary city, could be caught in the political backlash. So what do these developments mean for New Yorkers? And can we play a role in getting the country back to serious discussion about immigration reform? These questions open our fall season of Criminal Justice Matters. And to help us answer them, we're joined by City Council member Carlos Menchaca, chair of the Committee on Immigration, and Professor Farrin Anello of Seton Hall University, who heads the New York City Bar's Immigration and National Law Committee. Welcome to both of you. Professor Anello, let's start with you. So what could this bill, the elimination of sanctuary cities, actually mean for New York?
A couple of things. First of all, there's a bill that passed in the House that's going to be considered in the Senate that would remove federal funding under several different programs from cities that refuse to both share information with federal immigration authorities about individual people, and even refuse to request information and have policies such as New York and many other cities now do, telling police that their role is to enforce local immigration law, and they shouldn't be deputized as immigration agents because that's a federal role rather than a local role. So that's extremely concerning for New York and for many other cities that are focused on public safety and trying to make sure that the police build trust with the community and are able to get information from all members of the community, regardless of their status. Moreover, there's an amendment pending in the Senate that may be introduced shortly that would further penalize any cities that have restricted compliance with ICE detainers, which are requests that the federal government makes to cities or municipalities, asking them to extend the detention of someone who otherwise would be released for a criminal matter or a criminal arrest, in order to allow the federal authorities to investigate whether or not they may have a case for deportation. And that raises a number of serious concerns, which we can talk more about, but that also raises concerns for New York because New York recently, the City Council passed a very important detainer reform, which severely restricts compliance with these requests.
So it's concerning for New York, but would we risk losing the funding that we might get by saying by effectively thumbing your nose at the federal government and saying, well, we'll still go along with our policies, we'll keep being a sanctuary city? Is that within the realm of possibility? I mean, after all, we are considered liberal, progressive in terms of immigration issues.
No, again, thanks for having us. This is a really important conversation for New Yorkers to be having right now. The bills themselves, as they're currently written and where we are in conversation, would incredibly hinder our funding and access, and also hinder the direction that we've been pushing with this very progressive city council and mayor administration. So absolutely, this is a big moment for us in our country. A lot of what we've done, like the professor actually talked about, in our bills that restrict the ability for us to honor these detainers, is an incredible movement, but also opportunity for so many of our undocumented immigrants. We want them to come out of the shadows and engage civically in our communities. They're already doing that in their business, small businesses, and we want to just continue that movement. And these federal dollars, and also our municipal dollars that we're putting to help, for example, with Knife Up, the New York Family Unity Project, is really something that for us allows us to use municipal dollars for detention, legal representation with immigrants in detention.
But could we resist a federal order like that? I mean, could we say, well, they're out of the shadows, and they're coming out of the shadows, and we're helping them? This bill would reverse everything. I mean, can we in effect say, well, no, we're willing to risk losing that federal funding and keeping our policies?
Again, I think the conversation now and the debate needs to happen today, not after something like this passes. And this is why we need, and so many are coming out and talking against the Republican presidential election and the recent debate, and others that are coming are just an opportunity for us all that have been working on immigration reform for decades to now unite. Mm-hmm. As cities, sanctuary cities that have been doing this good work, and we're uniting across the nation.
So let me put it to both of you, maybe starting with you, the professor, is that, I mean, it's commonly seen that immigration reform, we've worked on it so long, it's over 3 decades now, and that if one looks at the polls, I mean, there's a remarkable popular approval for doing something about immigration, and there's a great deal of approval for the Dreamers Act, for instance. I mean, there's a widespread feeling that, you know, we've been going in the wrong direction, we need to change, poll after poll, and yet, you know, the political debates are in one direction. I'm wondering what you read as the political appetite now for actually, regardless of what happens in the Senate bill, for continuing on this path of immigration reform. Are we effectively paralyzed for the next political season?
Well, I mean, my view is that I agree with you that there is in the long term, there is a real need for this legislation, and people recognize that. I think around the country, increasingly, people are understanding that that we need action to make sure that the 11 million people who are living here undocumented, who are working hard, who are starting businesses, who are raising their children, many of whom are U.S. citizens, that we need to have a path to citizenship, and we need reform in a lot of different parts of our immigration law. I think in the short term, there is a lot of dysfunction in Congress, and I think that there's a lot of challenges with our primary system and politicians playing to sort of more extreme views that are not really mainstream. So I see that being a huge problem in the short term, but in the long term, I think that we need to keep pressing for comprehensive immigration reform.
Is the stream continuing? I mean, there's a lot of discussion about, certainly from Mexico, that the number of people who are crossing are fewer and fewer, partly because of the economic situation here and partly for a lot of other reasons. Is that true? Are we still getting the same numbers of people coming across the border?
The numbers do change over time, and you know, they've gone up and down at different times. There was a very large surge of people coming from Central America, particularly from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala.
The unaccompanied children.
Especially, yes, including many, many unaccompanied children, tens of thousands. And so, you know, that the numbers at different times have gone down, but there are certainly many of the factors that are driving the migration haven't changed. And so you're right that one factor is economic, but there's also a huge number of kids fleeing Central America due to gang violence. And that is a large, long-term problem that really is not evaporating. So I think we'll see fluctuations, but I don't see this as the end of the need to address the kids who are coming in and making sure that we have a safe way to take care of them when they get
Among your other experiences, you've run clinics for undocumented, for immigration in Miami and also in New Jersey. What are you seeing in terms, tell us some of the stories that you've run into. I mean, what are the issues that people have when they come here? How do they get here? And how do they resolve their problems?
Sure. Well, I mean, I currently teach at the Immigrants' Rights and International Human Rights Clinic at Seton Hall Law School in Newark. And we represent people in a wide range of immigration matters and removal proceedings, people applying for asylum, Convention Against Torture Relief, U visas, which are for victims of violent crime in the U.S., survivors of trafficking and domestic violence. There's also a lot of families coming, usually young mothers with little children. And a huge concern right now is, and since this migration sort of increased, is that the federal government is still detaining people at the border, families, small children in detention centers at the border. And many of them have relatives here in New York and elsewhere around the country where they could be released and they could be living safely here with a relative. But the administration, the Obama administration, unfortunately has pressed a policy of continuing this detention, and they were recently ordered by a judge that the judge recently found that this policy violated a settlement in a case that was meant to protect children who come over the border or migrate to the U.S. And the administration is continuing to fight that, unfortunately. They've reduced detention times, they've made some positive changes, but they're still detaining families at the border.
Carlos, where does New York stand in all this? I mean, New York has been a leader, certainly. You've been a leader at City Council in moving things along, but we're still very far from where I would take it you would think we should be. And some people are saying, well, we're actually going backwards now because of a lot of the things that have been happening. Where do you see yourself
Well, even
going?
if we just unpack what we just learned from the professor about the unaccompanied minors last summer, the surge, the city was able to respond with a budget allocation for legal representation. And today, every unaccompanied minor that came through the system was able to have legal representation. If this bill was to remove that opportunity for us to do that, we wouldn't be able to respond. The fact is that the immigration reform or immigration law in the country is broken. We're not there yet. And so cities have to be able to respond. And with this influx of families and children, this is about valuing those people. These are young kids and families. And so cities need to be able to do that. And that's what we've been doing. IDNYC, and if anybody who's listening to this report hasn't gotten it yet, log on to...
That's the municipal ID system.
This is our New York City, the largest in the country, not the first.
Which is an amazing advance.
It's an incredible opportunity for not just undocumented New Yorkers, but for everybody. This is a card that will benefit every New Yorker. And that is a big signal to our communities.
But is there a point at which New York really runs up against the wall? As you said, I mean, we need the federal government to really bring its act together and to say this is where we're going. And up to a certain point,
right.
There's a limit. I mean, New York City can
Steve,
only do so much.
I think the arrow needs to point in the other direction. I think that the values that we're getting and hearing from the federal government are off, and if we can continue to push from the cities up to the state and the federal government, that we value the people who are in our communities, that are residents, that are making lives better for themselves and for their neighbors, that's when we're going to have a better country. And that's the federal government is a representation of who we are as people on the ground. This is why I love being a city council member, because I can focus on a district. But those values need to go up, and we're bringing them up to the federal government.
So, quick question to both of you: are you optimistic or pessimistic about where we're going to be in months ahead? Quick answer: yes, no. Optimistic.
I'm incredibly optimistic for all the reasons I talked about, and we just need to connect the dots across the country.
Farrin?
And I'm optimistic, but I think we have a lot of work to do, and I thank Council Member Menchaca for his leadership, and the City Council's leadership as a whole has been very, very important for New York City, and a model, I think, for other cities to follow as well.
So thanks to both of you, and I hope to have you guys back again in a couple of months. Maybe we can talk about what's been done.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
New York may have some of the nation's most liberal policies towards undocumented immigrants, but that doesn't mean that things run smoothly. A number of organizations are working in the trenches, not just to help those facing deportation, but to provide the basic services they need to survive. The New Sanctuary Movement is one of the most active, operating out of a church in Midtown. We invited two of its leaders, Ravi Ragbir and Juan Ruiz, to give us the view from the grassroots. Ravi himself is facing a deportation order. Thanks for joining us.
2006.
Juan Carlos, let me begin with you. What is the New Sanctuary Movement?
There were people, religious people from across the nation, and we were talking about the policies that were making of our immigrant brothers and sisters victims and criminalizing them, which are still very much in place, the current immigration laws. So they have gathered us to basically come up with a manual in terms of how to provide advocacy, provide some relief to our undocumented brothers and sisters. And this was the Catholic Church. So at that meeting, I met this Lutheran minister, Alexia Salvatierra, and we began talking about what Elvira Arellano was doing in Chicago at that time, which she had taken refuge in one of our churches there in San Adalberto, taking sanctuary because of she was going to be deported, leaving orphan, her child, Samuel, I think it's Samuel, leaving orphan his child. So she had, as her last recourse, had gone into the sanctuary of the church to be protected.
So is it the idea of protecting undocumented immigrants basically against deportation orders, against federal government efforts to push them out of the country, or is it more than that, or are you providing services, or what's the
there
aim?
is both. There is a service and to the whole our immigration accompaniment, basically working with the people who are somehow experiencing a lot of suffering due to the immigration policies in place.
How deep is that suffering? Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, the people that you work with here in New York, are they in a particular danger in terms of health, or obviously being deported?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. This that has been driving all our efforts as communities of faith. You know, we realize that the immigration policy has been stuck for the last 30 years or so. I mean, this is not a new crisis, a new problem, a new challenge. But the suffering is really quite unimaginable, especially for the children. We're talking about 3 to 5 million children who are at home or who go to school without knowing that when they get back to their homes, mommy or daddy are going to be back.
This is nationwide.
And this is nationwide.
What's the situation in New York?
In New York, well, it's pretty much, New York is kind of a oasis in this kind of crisis.
Sanctuary.
Yes, it's a sanctuary city, but it's just by name. And I say that by name, with some an incisive criticism to our politicians here. Given that, there is a sense that given our questionable nature of being undocumented, being legal in this country, I mean, there is some sort of protection, The Article 41 under Mayor Bloomberg, which signed and basically says that all social services shouldn't be denied to people without any, regardless of the legal status, still in place. But we see more and more an increasing enforcement. This stems against immigrants, and this stems with a particular view of seeing the person, the immigrant person, the other, as a threat to our national security.
So, Ravi, let me bring you into the discussion of it. So, I mean, have you seen that play out, what Juan Carlos is talking about, that it's becoming more of a threat and more difficult and more unstable for the undocumented that you work with?
So it's more unstable in a number of ways. Yes, to answer your question concisely, yes. But it's more unstable in a number of ways because of the city's policies that was passed a year ago, where ICE would not be able to go into our prisons and hold people because they of their status. Now they're actually going out into the homes. So they're looking for people. They're aggressively going to the communities and going into those communities and knocking on people's doors, taking people from their homes and from their workplaces. We have seen that.
Wait, let me see if I understand this. So in other words, the city is still a sanctuary in the sense that if somebody's picked up and an ICE asks for a detention order, the city will refuse it. But you're saying now that they're working around that?
Right. So ICE is a federal agency. We're a city agency. ICE still has overriding, rules that they can go into the over the city's policies. Now, what happens is because we have restricted ICE access to people of undocumented status. Now they are finding other ways to do that. So one of the ways I just mentioned is going into the community deliberately, aggressively, proactively. But another way is even before that, going into the courtrooms. So people who are going to the court for whatever reason, if their status is highlighted, and this is especially in criminal cases, ICE will be there waiting for them before even the cases. You
mean they just pick a courtroom and say, well, there's probably going to be an undocumented immigrant there, we're going to watch?
Well, they don't just pick a courtroom. They will have access to once someone is arrested, the information is already sent to the ICE database, so that they already know that this person is arrested, and they will be able to research and find out.
But they don't know whether he's a citizen or
not. So one of the problems with the way we ask the law enforcement in New York and other parts of the country is they will always ask you your status. And if you don't give your status, they will then lock you up in, let's say you've been taken into Rikers Island, they will be taken into the harshest conditions in Rikers Island. So there's a threat if you don't give all the information that they ask from you.
I haven't been reading about this, so this is something that's sort of underneath the rhetoric that we are welcoming and open to undocumented immigrants.
So New York City is a sanctuary city in a lot of ways. We're not Arizona, right? Because so that people don't have to be afraid of walking on the streets to and from their homes. But and especially as we have the municipal ID, so that even if NYPD asks us for identification, this is who I am.
Let's explain. The municipal ID was just given out to anybody, and this is a major change in status for people. If they don't have papers, they still can go into an office and request municipal and New York City identification card.
As a resident of New York.
As a resident of New York. And all you have to do to get that is to provide your rent bill or what?
Well, you also have to prove identification. You have to prove who you are, and then you also have to prove that you live in New York City. So yes.
But you're saying that's not been enough, that obviously people are getting around that, and the situation is still unstable for the undocumented here?
You know, there are many factors. The problem is so compounded, given that there are many factors that play into this. I mean, the whole thing of quotas. You know, immigration, ICE has quotas in terms of the people that they need to be deported monthly, So they have to meet those quotas, even here in a sanctuary city. And we have to remember, the sanctuary name is not legal binding. It doesn't have much. It's not a solution. I mean, if we really want to come up with a solution, we really have to talk about amnesty for all immigrants. I mean, this has been stagnated for so many
But that's
years
a solution that really has to be at the federal level. We're not talking, no individual jurisdiction or the city can
Well, New York has some proposals. I mean,
Tell us about
New York is home.
New York is home as the legislation that was introduced by State Senator Rivera. Basically, it says that although New York State cannot give citizenship, national citizenship, you can give state citizenship. So all the benefits of being in the state of New York will be allowed to the person who lives in New York State.
Is that a practical protection, though, for somebody who's facing deportation?
It is not, because you still have the overriding federal policy. So ICE can still come into the jurisdiction. ICE can still go to people's home and locate someone and take them away. It also means that the person is sort of landlocked into New York State, and even more so, landlocked away from 100 miles away from the border, because CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, actively patrols that area. So it is not really New York State, but very confined into those areas.
It's a very Kafkaesque situation for someone who comes here without papers. Most people, I would think that it's a problem that's in Texas or in California. They don't see New York as a location for this. But Ravi, you've had some problems of your own. I don't know if you want to talk about them, that you're facing very similar. Maybe tell us briefly about.
Well, problems, yes. So I have been fighting my deportation for the last 9 years, since 2006, of which two years of those I spent in immigration detention.
Did you?
Yes, and you know, in New York, well, I was taken in New York City, but there is no detention centers in New York, so they took me into New Jersey. They held me in New Jersey while my case was being heard in New York. But that's not the bad part. When the beds were filled up, when the cells were filled up because they were holding too much immigrants in county jails, Bergen County, Hudson County, etc., what they did is they took me up and they moved me down to Alabama. So my family, my friends, everyone, my support group who lives in New York now are 1,000 miles away because I am in Alabama, which means I don't have access to resources. I don't have access to the community that continues to support me.
And what's your status now, briefly?
I still have a final order. I'm still facing deportation. I do have a stay until the end of April. But at that time, you know, immigration can then refuse to allow me to stay. They can pick me up and deport me.
And your family have children who were born here, and are they legally here, or would they have to be deported?
My daughter is a U.S. citizen. My wife is a U.S. citizen. My wife is, funnily enough, an immigration attorney. But she cannot do anything because of the federal policies that, you know, people talk about joining the line or applying for benefits, but there are no ways that anyone can access those benefits. It's basically been eliminated every single year. If an option is found, you know, we have not gone forward on immigration for the last 20 years. We have been coming backwards, and a lot of civil rights violations, a lot of human rights due process. In your introduction, you talk about due process. A lot of immigrant due process has been violated through this the way the policies have been implemented on so many levels.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice being here.
Immigration is a global issue. Every week, there's a new report about the thousands of people fleeing poverty or war in their homeland for a better future. No one disputes the notion that we need to protect our borders, but it must be balanced with the obligation to provide sanctuary to the tired and the poor. After all, that's what it says on one of our cherished city monuments, the Statue of Liberty. If our leaders forget that, it's up to us to remind them. I'm Steve Handelman. Thanks for watching. See you next time.